Welcome to MyLife, Chassidus Applied, episode 136. I'd like to open up with a new feature and asking you a question. MyLife, Chassidus Applied, has always been about you asking questions that I try to respond to. I want to ask you a question. What would you identify as being the three top challenges that we, Chassidim, Chabad Chassidim, individually and as a community face? I really would love to hear from all of you and be honest, blunt. The three major issues, the three most important issues that need to be addressed, that should be addressed. And I will gather your responses and then present them in future discussions on the topic. And I really believe that we have to all see ourselves as partners. Partners, as the Rebbe says in Tavshin Chavav, was 100 years of the Tzemach Tzedek's Histalkus, the word of the Tzemach Tzedek, that the Achdus of Chassidim will lead them toward Mashiach. So obviously the basic principle of Achdus and unity is very clear. But you can also take it to the next step, that we have to put our heads together and not just be bystanders, or definitely not, God forbid, victims, but actually proactive searching for answers. And the first answer, the first step toward finding an answer is asking the right questions. So again, I'd like to hear from every one of you, of course, if you're willing, to please share what you think are the three biggest challenges, difficulties, problems, define it as you see, crisis in our community. And you could submit your answer, the same forum, meaningfullife.com/mylife, same anonymous form where you can also submit questions. And I really would love to hear what people have to say about this. It'd be very interesting to see if there's a consensus on the matter, how different we are. And again, repeating it again, what are the three biggest questions, challenges, dilemmas that we have to deal with? And I'm not going to give any hints. This is not a right or wrong thing. It's really struggles that you may have personally, or that you may be witnessing, or that may be existing in the community in which you live. And though obviously we can open up a painful subject, but hey, that's the way we deal with things, is by opening them up, by speaking about it, instead of allowing it to fester like, God forbid, an infection that does not exposed to fresh air. With that, let us go in, let us enter into, as usual, the timely topic at hand, which is the period in time in which we're in, which is the beginnings of the month of Cheshvan, following the rich holiday season. And we're now in going to be reading the third chapter of the Torah, Lech Lecha, the first command to the first Jew by God, to Avram Avinu, to Abraham, who was still Avram at the time, without a hey, to go Lech Lecha Ma'artzecha. And as I always do, I try to gather together and distill what the Rebbe says, what Chassidus says on the particular time or topic. So the theme of this time, the energy of this period in time, is always the transition of the so-called spiritual high or spiritual environment in which we are completely encompassed during the Tishrei season, and entering into the mundane world, into the work world, into our routines and our patterns. And though we already entered last week and we spoke about it, but it continues becoming more intensified. The Rebbe would always speak about the levels of a Yaakov Hol Chadarke, Yaakov going on his way. So obviously, when in the early stages, when you leave a certain place, you're still under the impression and under the influence of the place that you were at. But as you go further into the year, and this Lech Lecha, as the name the Parsha suggests, is a journey. The journey continues, and the journey gets more intense and more distant from the source. And as such, it becomes more challenging. But at the same time, it's also more enriching, because you're able to see what you're capable of accomplishing as you move away from the so-called illuminated source, the Giluyim of the holidays of Tishrei. So Lech Lecha is that theme. The Rebbe brings from the Friedrich Rebbe and from the previous Rabbeim that Parsha Neach is a kalamut nevach. Parsha Neach is a somewhat depressing, a sad week. But when you come at the end of Parsha Neach, it becomes a little lebedik, because it's the birth of Avram Avinu. And Parsha Lech Lecha is a lebedik kavach. Parsha Lech Lecha is an illuminating week. Why is it kalamutna? Why is it a sad? Because we hear about the destruction of the population of the world due to the due to the world being completely consumed by corruption, by vice, and to the point that it's self-destroyed. The human race destroyed itself. So it's not a very pleasant story to hear. But then we read about, of course, Noach and his children and the family and the ark. And then we read how they build a new world. And by the end of the parsha becomes lebedik, becomes a little simchas because Avram Avinu is born. Now, you can ask the question, why Avram? What about Noach himself? Ish tzaddik? And Atomim Hoya B'Deresav? Even if he wasn't the tzaddik in all generations, but he was relatively, why do you have to wait till Avram Avinu? So the truth is, you can look at Hilchas Avodah Zarah from the Rambam, right in the beginning, a very fascinating introduction to how idolatry evolved. Because when you think about it, which fool would be bowing to a tree or to a stone or to the stars? You don't want to believe in God, don't believe in God. But what is this, like replacing God with objects? But he explains how it evolved from a state that first there was a complete faith in God, but then people want something tangible, so they found things that are so-called representative of God. Then they gave it more power than they should have, and they forgot about God, and they just identified with the object itself. But then he says, until the point then they started creating palaces and churches and knisiyot, places of worship around these objects. So that became full-blown avodah zarah, but didn't idolatry. But then he says, then was the Esan HaGadol, the great force came, and that's Avram Avinu. And he began, as the Medrash says, that from the time of Avram, his chilahoyer began to illuminate. The Arizal says that the yichud of Matan Torah, the unification that happened in Matan Torah, which we know, brought the world back to pre-Chet Tzadas, to pre-Tree of Knowledge period, which is like the perfection of the creation of the world, began, the Arizal says, with Avram Avinu. So Avram is a new stage in history, close to the third millennium from the time of creation. Avram Avinu was born in the year 1948, in the year, in other words, 1948 in the Hebrew calendar, and with him came a new approach. He began to reverse the process which had deteriorated. And we read this also in Medrash, Shir HaShirim Rabbah, as brought in the famous Basi Legani. People know this from the Basi Legani, that what? That in the beginning, Ikashchina B'Tachtenim, Basi Legani Achesikalo, B'Mokim Shoy Ikr B'Tchila, which was Ikr B'Shchina B'Tachtenim Heisin Ganed. But then, due to the sin, it caused the Shechina, the revelation of the divine presence on this world, to be concealed and so-called to be removed one stage. The next generation of crimes made it worse. Second, it became more concealed and even more elevated. Until the seventh generation of sins, and ultimately the flood, which brought to the place where the Shechina was most concealed, the divine was most concealed. And who reversed the process? Then came Avram Avinu. And he brought it from the seventh Shekiah heaven to the sixth, and Yitzchak from the sixth to the fifth, and Yaakov from the fifth to the fourth. Moshe, the Shvi, the seventh, from Avram Avinu, brought the Shekhinah back in the Mishkan V'Asel Migdash V'Shachanti B'Seicham. The process begins with Matan Torah, but consummated in a structure is the Mishkan, which was built and constructed and ultimately became V'Asel Migdash, the sanctuary that would become permanent later in the temple in Yerushalayim. So we see Avram Avinu plays a tremendous role, a significant role, a watershed moment in history, where he reintroduced the divine. He reversed the process. He reversed the pattern of deterioration, of the deceleration of human beings of a pagan world, and introduced God back into the picture. Which is why he's attributed to Avram, Av HaMoyin Goyim, the father of all nations, the father of monotheism, the father of bringing God back into the prominence that God deserves. Until this day, Avram is credited with being that pioneer. And this is the chapter. And interestingly, we read only about the birth. That's why it's a Simchatika chapter. Joy, a man that did that and reversed the flow, reversed the tide, is a great joy. The birth of Avram is shortly, briefly mentioned at the end of the last chapter, but the real story begins with Lech Lecha Martzacha, where we know he's already 75 years old. And Lech Lecha, in those two words, capture. Lech Lecha, go on to you, capture the essence of our journeys in life. to be pioneers just like Avram Avinu. In whatever world in which we live, whether it's a pagan world, whether it's a dark world, whether it's a world that's confused or distorted and their priorities are off, each of us is charged to come in this world, Lech Lecha ma'atzecha, to leave ma'atzecha melatcha besavicha, Ela Eretz, and go to Ela Eretz, to the land Asher Ereka, as the Alter Rebbe explains, Ereka, where I will show you who you really are. Because as long as you're under the influence of culture, Artzecha melatcha besavicha, the parental influences, culture, Artzecha, Maladatcha, which is your natural biases, you are not the true you. So Lech Lecha is a command to each one of us. More than a command, it's a gift. The gift to be able to grow and leave the forces that have shaped us, even if they were good forces, definitely if they were not so good, and make a mark in this world. To be an Avram Avinu in our own times. This is in itself the greatest preemptive measure that all the psychological and emotional fears, inhibitions, and maladies that plague our generation. The ability to rise above and transcend the here and now. And not only transcend it, Lech Lecha, and discover yourself. Become a force that changes things. Become an influencer. And thus you become less influenced. So Lech Lecha carries in it a message to each one of us. And in the context of Chassidus Applied and living Chassidus is the message of understanding that we are all empowered with Avram within us, our forefather, our ancestor, our patriarch, that empowered with the ability to make a difference. Empowered with the ability to come even into the old challenges that we face and to bring the divine into our lives. But Yikra Lokeil Elam, that Rebbe brings in the Maimer Bas Lagani, to show that the world is one with the divine. It's an expression of divine revelation. It's an expression of divine power. That's the mission we are charged with. And we do it through Lasis Daka Mishpat, Lamana Shitzavas Bonav Besa Achriv, Lasis Daka Mishpat. The Avram is because of what he dedicated his life with all his great ideas and philosophies, dedicated his life to educate and perpetuate the legacy through his children and his family, to do tzedakah and mishpat, kindness and justice, kindness and virtue, the different interpretations. And we are proud to carry that banner, to carry that legacy, to carry that mandate, which we receive from Avram Avinu. And we're able to achieve it with the power, Ma'aseh Avos Simon Lebanim. The actions of our forefathers are a Simon Lebanim, are a sign for their children, which means they also empower us. And that's the lesson, my friends, of Lech Lecha, that we don't go alone. As we travel into this world, even though we're no longer in the holiday season, we don't go alone. We go with God's command, we go with Avram's strength, we go with the pioneers of our ancestors who lead the way, who hold our hand as we move and forge ahead. Lech Lecha Matzach. Zayin Cheshvan, which is also this week, is part of that journey. Zayin Cheshvan, as I mentioned in the last episode, the Rebbe often would discuss it, and actually had Farbrengens on that day. That Zayin Cheshvan is when they started asking for Kshamim, for rain, praying for rain in Israel. Why wait till Zayin Cheshvan? On Shmini Atzeres we already prayed for rain. Because after the Aliyah L'Regel, after the pilgrimage, 3 times a year. In this case, we're talking the pilgrimage that they came for Sukkot to Yerushalayim. So the rain season can be an impediment for a person to travel. And everyone's going back. So Zayin Cheshvan was when the last Jew, natural travels, arrived at Nahar Pros, Euphrates River, which he crossed. And we're talking about the Jews who were living in Babylon. So the Avis Yisrael, the care that a person is traveling, it may not be you, and it may not even be a majority of people. But someone may be impeded. Someone may suffer some type of hardship in their journey because you're praying for your rain. So we hold up with a prayer until they arrive back home. Each one under their person under his fig tree and the person under his vineyard in a peaceful way. So Zayin Cheshvan is, in a sense, a continuation. As long as we don't do that prayer, we're still continuing with the impression of Tishrei. Because those people traveling, why were they traveling back home? Because they're coming with all the resources that they gathered in the month of Tishrei. So that's Zayin Cheshvan. Okay. So now, that comes together with the theme of Lech Lecha. What Lech Lecha? Because it's about the journey. Each one in our own way. And God should bless us that our journey should be pleasant, they should be rich, they should be empowering, and we should have the least amount of aggravation. But knowing fully well that whatever comes our way, we have the strengths. We have the strength and the power to deal with anything that comes our way, fulfilling the mission for which we were charged. Let me read feedback from websites and from people writing to us. So one feedback I was given. Thank you, Rabbi Jacobson. Thank you so much for your podcast every week. Listening to them always nourishes my soul and sets me on a good path for the week to come. I love how you address whatever is thrown at you so succinctly, yet with such clarity. Always appreciated. And again, you can make your comments, pro or con or neutral, at meaningfullife.com/MyLife, where you can present your complete anonymous comments or anonymous comments or questions, and as well as write anything you wish, and we'll try to address. This week is also election day, on Tuesday, the presidential elections, which frankly is hard to avoid because of all the noise and the clutter that is going on. So here's the question. What is the Jewish and Chassidic way of viewing this election? The impending presidential election has captured the country's attention like never before. The low standard and the sheer nastiness of the candidate seems unprecedented. How should we view this election in light of Torah and Chassidus? How should a chassid view the upcoming elections? Okay, an excellent question. And especially this year when you have candidates where, as people like to say, I don't know who I dislike more. So it's not about liking, it's about less disliking. I obviously am not going to weigh in on this. It's a democratic process. Everybody can choose as they see fit. But I will address the topic because everything is Hashgacha Pratis, divine providence. And I've been asked to talk about this. I have some pointed out quite conspicuously and deliberately not discussed it for many different reasons. But being that it's this week, and as I said, Hashgacha Pratis, millions and millions of people talking about it, if not hundreds of millions. And as the President of the United States, it's the strongest, the most powerful position in the world. So people ask me all the time, what does the Rebbe have to say about elections? Do we look at a candidate because he's pro-Israel or anti-Israel? Do we look at a candidate under what criteria do we look at a candidate? So let me begin with that overall, and then I'll move into this particular election. So obviously, Mispal B'Shleima Shel Malchus. Jews pray for the peace of the government, because when they're peace, it'll be peace for us. So obviously, we always look for a government that is the most virtuous and kindest, and one that lives up to God's standards. So it's not like we ignore it. We see it as important. Ala Medina's Boya Amar, Rosh Hashanah, actually the destiny of nations is determined. Leiv Melachim V'Sarim B'Yad Hashem. The heart of kings and the ministers is in the hands of God. And we know there's different stories, the story of the Alter Rebbe and the other Gedolei Yisrael, which one had different opinions, who should win the Franco-Russian war. Should it be Napoleon of France to make life physically easier for Jews? Should it be Alexander of Russia, that physically would not be as pleasant, but spiritually would be, the integrity would be maintained? And the Alter Rebbe woke up that Rosh Hashanah early, and blow shofar. And later the other side, the other tzaddik said, the Lidvak Atarez Gechabt. And that's what happened. Napoleon and his French army got stuck right near Moscow. The cold, bleeding winters of Russia humbled them, as they later would do the Nazis as well, in their march. So we see that we do reckon with, and we do think about the nations of the world, and of course a leader, as I said, Leiv Melachim V'Sarim, is defined by God. So how do we look at it? We look at it the following. I never heard from the Rebbe, and I stand corrected if somebody can find evidence otherwise, that he determined, a president was determined by their attitude to Israel. The Rebbe always and consistently would say, Eretz Yisrael should do exactly what it needs to do, and America will always support it. Even if they yell on the outside, behind the scenes, they will always support. And we see presidents that were so pro-Israel, Israel controlled his destiny and sometimes messed up things, God forbid. And presidents who were not so pro-Israel, and yet Israel, if it behaved a certain way, it got what it wanted. So the Rebbe never considered that. What did he consider? He considered the ethics and the standard and the virtue that was articulated and voiced by a president. Of all the presidents, the one that you find so-called the Rebbe's greatest support was for President Reagan. We're not talking about that at the election. Because President Reagan unabashedly would speak about God, would speak about education, would speak about virtue. And that was the key thing. Because what is the ultimate role of a government leader, of a president? It's not the economy from a Torah point of view, a Chassidus point of view. It's not the economy. It's not the administration. It's not different policies. It's, are you heightening the standard, the spiritual, the ethical, and moral standard of the country? That is how we look at an election. Now, of course, it begs the question whether it's the two candidates that we have, which one exactly represents that. Sadly, both of them seem to be bringing things down to the gutter. And both don't really speak about this. And today, in a world of pandering and pundits and so on, you don't really hear this message at all. That's why it's so difficult to weigh in when you're talking about this criteria. That's why by the Rebbe, a president who supported the moment of silence, who supported the Ten Commandments, who supported education, especially moral education. That's the key. Because that's the heart and soul of what and the government is supposed to accomplish. Create healthy citizens. Citizens that are wholesome, that have healthy relationships, that build great, beautiful marriages and powerful families, and leave a legacy. As I said, last is Doka Mishpat, Tzedek Mishpat, Tzedek V'Yesher. That's the bottom line. If you can determine which of the two candidates today is better for that, God bless you. However, this is the challenge that we have in every type of election. Now, let's talk about this particular one. Obviously, everybody knows the headlines, whether it's the emails from one side, whether it's the coarse language from the other, and how they attack each other. It's probably never been as nasty and as low standard as it is today. So I want to just share with you a story. I remember after I wrote the book, Torah Meaning for Life, so obviously the publisher, William Morrow, set up different interviews. I traveled around the country to do different book signings. So one interview was scheduled for a Miami-based radio show that was a national show that reached a lot of people. So it was like somewhat of a big thing. It was scheduled for Erev Yom Kippur, Tov Shin Nun Vov, I believe it was. So that would be 1995, October 1995. So it was scheduled, I remember very vividly, it was Erev Yom Kippur. Fine, so I was ready to do it. It was scheduled, I think, for 10 o'clock in the morning, 11 o'clock in the morning, actually. Then that morning, news broke that the verdict, the non-guilty verdict of O.J. Simpson was issued. The jury came back with a verdict, not guilty. Using Jimmy Cochran's language, if the glove don't fit, you got to acquit. The jingle, as some put it. So the interviewer, the producer of the show, called me and said, we love your book and we'd love to talk about it, but today everyone in America is talking about O.J. Simpson. So it's a wasted interview. If we do the interview, people are going to just tune out. They're not interested. I fully understood. So I said, okay, but what happens if I talk about O.J. Simpson? Oh, if you're ready to talk about O.J. Simpson, great. I had no idea what I was going to do, but I just knew that you have your foot in the door, you stay there. Okay, 11 o'clock, the interview was scheduled, 11:30, I don't remember. It was just right after the verdict. And the interview begins. And of course, the interviewer says to me, so you probably heard about the verdict, what do you comment? So I say, I have to tell you, the verdict wasn't just about O.J. Simpson, it was also this racial tensions between the blacks and the whites, and what's justice and not justice, and all the resentment and the anger, etc. So I have to tell you, the book Torah Meaning for Life, the wisdom of the Rebbe, has the answer to these problems. And remember, on the phone, she's like, you could feel her jaw drop. She says, really? Tell us. So I said, well, there's a section there where I tell the story that when there were the riots in Crown Heights, which exposed the tensions here, and the black pogrom at the time, attacking and actually killing Yankel Rosenbaum and causing other grave damage. Yes, they said it was provoked by the mistaken accident of Gavin Cato, a young black boy tragically killed in a car that was driving back, one of the entourage of the Rebbe's cars coming back from the oil, but it was an accident. And here was cold-blooded murder. So bottom line, it was a pogrom. There was a lot of tensions. And then all the accusations that the police were told by Dinkins or others to stand down and to let people vent. Actually they say that's what caused Dinkins lose the election, and later Giuliani came in and things started turning around. New York became dramatically changed. Some say the watershed moment was the Crown Heights riots. So David Dinkins, the mayor, came to see the Rebbe by dollars. And the Rebbe, he said to the Rebbe, I'd like a blessing, there should be peace among the two peoples, the blacks and the Jews, the blacks and the whites. And the Rebbe said, not two people, one people under one God, under one administration. Something like that. So I shared that. I said, until we don't recognize that every human being is creating the divine image. So when you murder someone, you're murdering the divine image. And when there's conflicts, whether you're black or white, whatever color, you're creating the divine image. Until we don't recognize that, we will not have our real solution. Yeah, you'll have short-term band-aids and short-term solutions. But then I said, I want to share something with you, and this is the key. I said, while we're speaking right now, it's Erev Yom Kippur, it's the day before Yom Kippur. And my colleagues and friends and family, everybody's running around now, rushing, preparing for Yom Kippur. Running to the mikveh, doing this thing, doing that thing. So while the whole country is consumed with O.J. Simpson, here's what I said. I said, you have to remember the story with Levi Yitzchak Berditchever, and I said this on the radio. I said, what's the story? He stood by the Amud, he was leading the prayer, and he said, the Prussians say that the Prussian king is the greatest. The Russians say that the Russian Tsar is the greatest. The French say that their emperor, the French emperor, is the greatest. And I, Levi Yitzchak ben Sarah Shosha, say, Yiskada al v'yiskada shmei Rabba. Hashem. I said, with all that's going on, and it may be important, it's the headlines and everyone's talking about it, you have to remember there are things that are more eternal and lasting, and Yom Kippur among them, that have transcended and precede this verdict and precede this generation, and many generations have been with us forever. So I say, I want to say the same thing with elections. It's very easy to get caught up in the whole trivia and in the sensations and the sensationalism of this whole thing. But remember something. We are a nation that's here for thousands of years. From Avram Avinu, almost 4,000 years. We brought civilization to this world. There are times we have to realize that we have to stand above the fray and not be so consumed with every stupid detail, as much as it's being beamed to us and streamed to us and so on. And remember, with all the elections, Leiv Sarim Lochem B'Yad Hashem, God runs this world. Don't know if we have to make a much difference. Obviously, vote your conscience. But the point I want to make is, remember, whatever happens, there's a higher hand and a higher force. And it's pretty hard to deny when you see the goings and comings of what's happening now. So I say that is the 2 points I wanted to make about the election. Number one, what we expect in a leader. And number two, remember, let's take everything with a grain of salt and transcend, be greater people. I sat at the feet of a great man, the Rebbe. So elections come and go. One lesson the Rebbe said from elections was Yudalef Nisan, Tafshin Lamed Vav, I think it was, or Lamed Zayin. That the election, they say you run for election, you run for office. Why run? Why not walk? Why not try to be run? Is you don't physically run, because when you want something, you run. Zot l'dvar mitzvah. The Rebbe said the lesson of running towards something, meaning you are passionate about it, you're excited about it. So with that said. But beyond that, getting into the details of Watergate and other things that happen and scandals, we stand above it all. And unless it affects directly God's plan, which is the morality and ethics of our citizens, it frankly is not so significant. So, we move on to the next question. Should I remain friendly with an accused abuser? Okay, it's a tough question, but we shall address it. It also relates to something I discussed in episode 127. Are we supposed to love criminals? So here's what someone writes. A long-term close friend was accused of child molestation. In past MyLife episodes, you described such a situation as zero tolerance. This person doesn't come to the men's mikveh, but I see him occasionally at early minyanim, since he has to go to work early. My question is this. He, like all Jews, is descended from Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. And he has a chelik elikam and mal mamash, divine soul. So I feel I should relate to him politely, somewhat normally, smiling at him, wishing him good wishes, and in general being friendly. He paid me a shiva call after being accused when I was sitting shiva for my mother, whom he knew from his frequent visits to our house. How should we relate to him? Okay, I appreciate the question, sensitive question, important question. Now, obviously applies to many given situations, many situations that are similar. So we have, thank God, a Torah for these inyanim. Okay, the Torah, first of all, makes it very clear. Yatamu chatoyim v'lo chetim. May the sins be erased, but not the sinners. We don't personalize. It's horrible and terrible to hear that someone is accused of child molestation. If it's untrue, God forbid, then obviously the whole thing shouldn't, the question doesn't apply, because he should be cleared, and we should do everything possible to have justice and clarity and truth. But God forbid, if we're unclear, or it's pretty much there's strong evidence in this direction, so it's a tragedy of tragedies. We don't celebrate, we don't dance and sing, we quote an abuser, we cry. We cry that a human being can fall so low, could hurt such another person, and whatever there's no excuses. We cry. Even even an enemy that falls, you don't celebrate. Why? Because you're crying over the fact that a person has done something that's so ungodly and so harmful and so on. Now, that means that we recognize the damage done, we recognize it, and we have to hold the person accountable, especially if they still can be dangerous, which is the next point I want to make. If a person is still either unrepentant and is a danger, visible danger to others, which is very possible, there's one approach. If it's clear that this is a thing of the past and the person has rehabbed, or we know clear evidence that this is not possible to happen again, it's a different approach. So I want to go to the next step. So the next step is like this. As much as we separate the sin from the sinner, this doesn't mean the sinner is not accountable. And especially if they still can be dangerous. Unfortunately, this particular issue, this particular crime, is one that is hard to rehabilitate, and most people, in most cases, will not really acknowledge it. That's one of the sad things. So if you're a true friend, I think it's a matter of mixing two elements together. One is absolutely zero tolerance. It's unacceptable, such a behavior. And I don't care what excuse anybody gives. They say they were molested, or whatever explanation. There's no excuse. But if you really want to correct your ways, there is a concept called tshuva. You know how? Go into rehab. Go to a professional. Unfortunately, I say this from a hard-earned experience, most will not do that. They want your friendship. They want you to support them. They want you to support that, deny that it happened. But when you say to them, you know something? There's evidence. Maybe you're in denial. Maybe you're just avoiding it. Go for help. Suddenly they don't want to hear that. So I think the first most vital thing is, if you're a true friend, is to help the person go for help. That's the most important thing of all. That alone is a testimony that the person is truly trying to correct ways. The person is not ready to go for help, then I have to say that you can become, unfortunately and unwillingly and unwittingly, an accomplice. Why is it an accomplice? Because if you don't protest, people start saying, oh, he has this friend, he has that friend. So it's very important that we do things to help the person find help. Now, does that mean you have to yell at the person in the shul or in public and shame that person? Not necessarily. Unless Rabbonim, Ashpim, and everybody come together and they objectively look at it and they see this must be done because he's dangerous or something else that compels one to do that. We have in Torah halachas for heichiach, techiach, esamisecha, for techacha, how you rebuke someone, how you speak to someone. And obviously all this is predicated that there's evidence or there's very clear, almost guaranteed that something happened. So if you really want to care, you have to look at the Torah and realize we're not personalizing this. Even if we are to demand that a person go for help, that's not because we personalize, because something against you, you did something terrible. And it has to be corrected. Cannot be ignored. It causes damage for generations. This we know today. Minimizing it is not a solution. Not that you're suggesting otherwise. So, in the final analysis, I would say, I would not suggest that you have to completely cut ties. I think being cordial is fine, but I think it's important to know that if you are indeed a friend, that person sees you a friend, maybe you should use more than just being cordial, but actually encouraging help, maybe in a sensitive way, going over and speaking to that person, obviously with permission. They may say the whole thing is not true, it's rumors. Okay, then you have to make decisions based on that. I can personally say, I also have friends and have also people that have been in that situation. It's case by case. In some cases, I did cut ties, not overtly. I avoid the situation. I avoid because I don't feel that person is really going for help and is not interested in what I have to say anyway. Only interested in getting my support, and that, nothing else. So you have to do this case with other people. I have seen them actual visible change and visible remorse and actual make amends, that as difficult as it may be. So the point, the bottom line is that we're not personalizing. It's not what I feel, you feel. We can be absolutely angry and absolutely vigilant and feel our blood boiling that someone did something like that to a young child, obviously. But that's not how we base our attitudes. We base our attitudes by a Torah. What does God say you do? And God doesn't just say you have compassion and forgive. Especially if damage was done to another person. We can't be another lechaveri, you have to have mechila from the other person. More than mechila, you have to make amends and all that tshuva entails. So that's my general response to this question. Obviously there's more that can be said about it, but that's how I would approach it. Again, zero tolerance for what happened, because that is unacceptable. And if we in any way support or create an environment where people feel they can go back and do something like that, after you knew, tell me something worse than that. A reidif, it's a din of a reidif, somebody like running with a knife, and you decided, I'm going to just be nice to that person, and then you see they run with a knife again tomorrow. Then I don't think being nice to them is exactly what should be done. And I know we could say it's not a knife and they're not killing right now, but there are many, many parallels and many similarities. Now, of course, with a knife, you do everything. You call the police, and you do everything to subdue that person and make sure you get the knife out of his hand. Here, you don't have a physical knife. You have, however, a person that could abuse and molest and hurt another person. So you have to use that analogy as well. But even then, with a knife, we're talking about because it's a danger to others. It's not about because we're personalized. We're not saying you necessarily are the worst person on earth, but you're behaving in the worst possible way. And that's the subtle distinction we have to make when we deal with these type of issues. Okay. And above all, if there's danger to others, that comes first. Protecting young, innocent people takes priority to a person's shame and to a person's personal issues. You need help, you want help, go for help. But we're not going to allow other people who are innocent to be hurt because a person feels they're going to be shamed or they're going to be destroyed. So you sort of thought about that beforehand, and do something now about it, and be a living example what it means to be a Baal Tshuva in the full sense of the word. Next question. Rising above the effects of a previous bad relationship. Which also discussed in episode 115, healing from past best forgotten relationships. How can I get on with my life and find another relationship after being intentionally hurt by someone whom I trusted to have my back, someone who was supposed to care about me? I was treated with contempt and a total lack of care. I'm shocked and emotionally frozen to the extent that when I'm introduced to people and when I meet someone, they can sense my pain and fear. No one wants to see me a second time. I try to be nice, supportive, and friendly, but no relationships eventuate. I need help metabolizing and understanding why and how someone could be so cruel and would act with such contempt, and advice in placing distance between myself and the relationship. Well, I should reread that. Someone act with such contempt, and I need advice and help placing distance between myself and the relationship. There are three things that can happen when a person has something bad happening to them. One is, of course, denial. You just put the whole thing under the rug, you move on. That actually can work if it's not a serious thing, and if it's something that you can actually push away. Great. Rise above it, ma'avid al midesov, like Yosef, and you move on. A second thing, or unfortunately much of denial doesn't happen that way. Denial just pushes under the carpet, but you still are seething, or you're carrying internally deep resentment and anger. A second approach is an approach of accepting it. Maybe something's wrong with me. Becoming a victim. Becoming a so-called person who has the battered wife syndrome that allows to be hurt and be stepped all over, coming from deep, low self-esteem. And the third option is to carry bitterness and anger the rest of your life. Want to get even, want to that person should suffer, and you carry that type of almost uncontrollable anger and rage. Why that person is getting away with it? How come no one protests? How could that person go on with their life? So this denial, acceptance, and allowing to be abused, or you become a seething, angry, bitter person. But there's a fourth approach, and that's the Torah approach. It's based on Tanya in Geras HaKedesh, Simchav Hey, about anger. To know that the person who did it will be punished for al re'eh b'chiroseh. He made a bad choice, so he will be accountable. But ala nizik fa nigza min hashamayim. Something happened to you. It's not about blaming anyone else. There was a reason it happened. Your job is not to go in denial or to accept it, as if nothing happened, or to go into this bitter and angry state that often demoralizes and breaks people. But to realize that there's a deeper story going on. What do you learn from it? How do you grow from it? How do you grow through it? And how do you become a more refined person? And you don't want to remain a victim of that person. One of the ways of remaining a victim is either accepting the abuse or the other way around, constantly carrying it. That you're so angry you can't move on with your life because you're carrying it. So the fourth option is to free yourself from it and realize things happen. It happened to me, it's not me. I may have suffered, but I'm not a sufferer. And that's the key to growing beyond bad relationships. The tone of this note, I sense how the hurt you have, and I understand it could be very well justified. I'm not challenging or questioning it. But what is it doing for you? What is it doing for you? You want to get to a state where you can take this experience and turn it to something positive, to become a great person. And we're not talking about whether you have to forgive, and we're not talking about whether you have to go back to that person. That's another discussion. We're talking about you. For you, you want to free yourself from the toxins that resulted from your being hurt. That you can live with your life, a positive life, a forward-thinking life. And it happens, things happen. That doesn't mean you forget. It doesn't mean we're ignoring it. It means that you are taking it and using it as a catalyst to grow. Now, of course, I would recommend talking to a mashpia, talking to someone that can walk you through this and support you along the way, because my words are words, but implementing is much harder than just hearing it. So I think it's critical to find that type of support to help you grow and reach the places you can reach, and how much potential is not being achieved and actualized because you're so consumed or affected by this. Yes, no one wants to see you a second time. People want to avoid you because they feel toxic energy. You may be the victim, but you're part of it, you're carrying it. And people don't want to just be around a person who's bitter or angry or constantly complaining. You want to be a positive person that people want to be near you, that gravitate to you, and so on. Okay, next question. What is the significance of karbanos? Okay. Question goes like this. Could you please explain why sacrifices are fundamental for Jewish observance and we should feel sad for not having them? What are we lacking without sacrifices? Karbanos. A friend told me that prayer is an evolution from sacrifices and that she thought sacrifices were brutal and she was happy we did not have them anymore. I also find the sacrifices disgusting
and that somehow prevents me from desiring to have the Beis Hamikdash with all my heart. Could you please explain why sacrifices are fundamental for Jewish observance, and we should feel sad for not having them? What are we lacking without them? Okay, this is a repeat of the opening line. Sorry about that. Fine. The word for sacrifices in Torah is karbanos, carbon. The source, the root for the word carbon is kiruv, to bring closer. It's almost the opposite of a sacrifice. Sacrifice means to sacrifice something, to give something up. Offering, karbanos, the better translation, offering, is to come close to something, to offer something. How do you reconcile the two? Because sacrifice sounds like, okay, we're burning, and sacrifice is one thing for another thing. A karban means you're elevating and you're bringing things closer. Now, the basis of all this has to be, of course, that God created the world, and God tells us how we come closer to who we are supposed to be and to the divine, and how we don't. Second thing that we have to remember is that God created the animals and the human beings. Now, anyone that eats a meal, also that animal was killed, not necessarily sacrificed, but was slaughtered in order for you to eat a meal. Does that bother you too? Now, some people are bothered by that too. But as long as it's not in my sight, I don't see it, some will say. How could the Torah sanction such a thing? So this gets into what Chassidus explains, that the reason that an animal was created was in order to be elevated to a higher state. When we eat a mineral, or a vegetable, apple, or another vegetable, or fruit, or an animal, so the Sefer Ikrim, Chassidus cites, says what's happening is, when you eat it properly, that food gets elevated from doimim to tzameach, from the mineral and animate to the vegetable kingdom, from that to the animal kingdom, and from the animal kingdom to the human. So that's why you find, interestingly, that there are far more minerals and far more vegetation than there are animals. Because the more something is consumed, the more it multiplies. That's how God made it. So when we see different animals consuming predators and prey, whether it's certain larger insects eating smaller insects, or larger prey eating the insects, or even greater prey and more aggressive ones eating the weaker animals. Do we have a problem with that? That's the way nature was created. We don't have a problem because that's the way the balance of nature is. As a matter of fact, if that didn't happen, there'd be an overabundance of the species that's supposed to be consumed to some extent to keep its population at bay. In different parts of the world, when a certain animal who was a predator was extinct, there became an overpopulation that destroyed the crops and destroyed vast areas because termites, locusts, or other creatures, because they were not kept at bay, because the predator, that was the killer, was not there any longer. So this is all part of the symbiotic mystery of environment and of the world, how it all works together. And there's a balance. When we human beings who have free will, we can of course disturb the balance by just indulging and destroying animals. When you eat an animal, or even for that matter a mineral or a vegetable, and you don't use it for the right purpose, if you don't elevate it, you don't make a blessing, it's like theft. Who gave you a right to consume another form of life? Like the Frierdiker Rebbe was told by the Rebbe Rashab when he rubbed the leaf. What right did you have to disturb the trajectory of the leaf's existence? And how much more so when you're dealing with creatures that are alive in the real sense. But everything is alive in a certain way. So, however, when you eat it l'shem shamayim, when you eat it for the right purpose, then the animal or any food will thank you, because now I'm elevated to a place I could never have been elevated. I could never have been part of your mitzvah. I could never have been part of building something beautiful because I was just in my place. So animals, same thing with vegetable and other lower species, they don't They don't change their roles. They don't go lower, but they don't go higher either. We have the ability to make them lower or higher. Bringing a carbon is elevating, and a kiruv not just for us, but also a kiruv for the animal, because it's allowing the animal to become part of something greater. It looks like what you call slaughter or killing. Listen, some things look that way, but they're a necessary part of the growth and elevation of this world. And that's why it's called carbon. Today, Talmidim became karbanos tiknum. Tefillas became karbanos tiknum. Tefillas became Talmidim tiknum. Prayer is a certain way because you're giving of your flesh and blood. you are also giving. It's not quite a offering, but we speak about the offerings, and we are offering ourselves to God. The Ramban explains that when you bring an offering, you have to actually envision that it's happening to you, and in God's grace, He's allowing you to transfer it to the animal. But this, of course, requires the understanding that these animals were created for this purpose, and you're actually doing them a favor and elevating them when you bring them as a karban. Okay. Next question. This question is, can video games be used as an appropriate outlet? Hi, Rabbi. Chassidus Applied is truly a breath of fresh air, and I can't express how much some of the advice that I've gotten from it has helped me. I'm a Baal Tshuva, and I was frum for a few years, even before coming to yeshiva. This is now my 3rd year in yeshiva. Before I decided to dedicate this portion of my life to learning in yeshiva, video games and movies always served as my temporary escape from reality and allowed me to recuperate from difficulties in my life. Now that I'm in yeshiva, I feel uneasy about doing the same things. Compared to my life before yeshiva, it's now a lot more taxing due to the intense schedule and demanding mashpiyim, and so I feel I need these things even more. The issue is I feel as if I'm leading a dishonest life now, constantly hiding these things from people. I feel that if I had some sort of validation for these things, that this dishonest feeling would go away. Is it okay to do these things, videos, to relax? Is it really all that different than watching sports, which many yeshiva students do openly? Okay. It's actually a difficult question to answer. Why? If you go with the highest standards of Torah, a person should have 1 second of bittul Torah, wasting time. Should always be involved in doing Torah and mitzvahs, except when the Torah itself says you should be doing something else. Then, of course, there's no room for any type of entertainment, sports, even neutral things. However, realistically speaking, are we on that level? Do we not waste time? So that's why you have the concept of rishus, of things that are not forbidden, but they're also not a mitzvah. The Alter Rebbe in Tanya dedicates entire chapters to this topic. He talks about rishus klipas nega, talks about secular wisdom, talks about activities like humor and other things, and explains how you can elevate that into kedusha. Okay, but that's a very particular type of focus. Many people who watch sports or are entertained by sports or videos, and we're talking everything up here, halacha, there's nothing inappropriate. Don't necessarily elevate it l'shem shamayim. It's, as you said, it's more like almost like running, fresh air. So that brings it to another level. We're not talking about doing it l'shem shamayim, but in some way is like an exercise. Could you exercise every morning? Play basketball. Do other things, go swimming. So that argument can be made that even though it's not mamish l'shem shamayim, but it has a positive element effect on you, on your peace of mind, and relaxes you. So it's acceptable. Now let's take it to the next step. What about reading a book? Not a non-kosher book, but not a Torah book. A neutral book, a story, a novel, a self-help book. And then, of course, the next question is things like this, videos or other things. So if we're not talking about a davar asur, something forbidden, it goes into the category of certain rishus, which I would not on this just make a blanket statement, one size fits all, cookie cutter, that everyone can do whatever they like. I would suggest talking to a mashpia that's sensitive and understands all sides of the issue. A good mashpia will understand when a person needs to have time out, and for some people time out may be a video game, maybe a different type of game. Now, playing a board game on the table, is that worse? Is that better than a video game on a video? The video game can lead you to other places on the internet. That may be the problem, but not the game per se. So I think this has to be looked at with that type of balance. We know the high standard. Again, the high standard is we should be learning Torah, Lecha, Chassidus, Avedis Hashem, davening, mitzvahs all the time. We all need time to rest. You have the concept of recess in yeshiva. Even the Yitem Chetmim had a time where they had so-called for themselves. take a walk, write a letter, fabreng. So I think it's important to fill that time with good kosher things. And the more you fill it with healthy things, the less you need to go resort to others. Whether the question you're asking about video games, sports, or other things fits into that, I would leave that for case by case. It's definitely possible, or else I would say clearly no. You see, the Rebbe spoke a whole sikh about playing soccer for children in Shmini Tov Shin Mem, the lessons you learn from it. Wouldn't speak about something you shouldn't be doing. Should older bochum be playing soccer? See, if there was talking about children, that needs to be discussed. But the concept of having a time where people go, let's say, to summer camp, and we know, sanctioned by the Rebbe, it's not all day learning. There is learning, and there's the older bochum, the older students, the older campers are learning more, and that may be the priority. But there's also more than just learning going on, because it all goes into that category of reshus that we need for healthy, for the welfare of our well-being, and to help us be stronger. So therefore, we can then learn Torah better, and so on. That would be the way I respond to it. But I don't think you have to advertise it. I would go find someone you can speak to. There are a lot of mashpiyim that may not relate to this. They may just say, not allowed to, that's that. Stigmatize it. But others will speak and listen to you. Some people play an instrument, music. Others do other things, and so on. More to say about this topic, but I'll suffice for now. Okay, then there's one follow-up, Chassidus and Psychology follow-up. Please clarify. This is a follow-up to last week's 135th episode. The Agdam of Tanya is referring to all answers to all questions about Avodas Hashem. How does this relate to all the answers to all questions about psychology? 1. 2. In the shir you addressed this by saying psycho-spiritual. What is the nature of this concept? For example, you said it does not include bipolar. Does it include other matters like depression, addiction? It would be helpful to delineate what matters Chassidus allegedly addresses and which not. Okay, it's a good question. But firstly, I want to say that I addressed this at length, both in this MyLife program as well as in writing online when the program began almost 2.5 years ago, which is connected to understanding what addresses what not. Let's just eliminate a few things. Anything that goes into the category of healing, clinical healing, just like a headache, a toothache, heart issues, God forbid, diabetes and so on, mental illness, God forbid, all these items, nitn reshus l'reif l'rapis. It doesn't say in Tanya you should learn Tanya if you have a heart problem, or even if you have indigestion. However, when you get into the psycho-spiritual, what does that mean? Psychological issues. Not clinical depression where you need medication or more intervention. But the Alter Rebbe speaks about atzvus, he speaks about kas, he speaks about sina, tina, jealousy, anger, as I mentioned. It talks about rage, about hatred. It's full of Tanya, filled with these things. And he absolutely talks about human emotions. So I would say Chassidus does have the answers to all that, and the Alter Rebbe did mean that. That's why he says, if you don't find the answer, go to someone that can help you. Keilim Shabir. He wouldn't write that. He say you don't find it, means maybe it's not there. But he's clearly instilling in us the confidence that it is there. So, since it's there, what is missing? What missing is we may not understand it, as I discussed last week. So I would say it's all in there, and yes, we could develop a sophisticated, psychological, Chassidic-based psychological therapeutic model. And I would say furthermore, when Mashiach comes, that's what we'll have. Molar Deus Hashem, we will know the psyche of a human being better than anyone. Why? Because the Torah, God created this psyche. And therefore God can tell us what that psyche is like. I think you could have a partnership. Those that have the clinical training, those that have the methodologies developed by human beings, like scientists and psychiatrists and psychologists and so on, combined with the inner knowledge that Kabbalah and Chassidus provides of the psyche, of the conscious and the supraconscious, of the emotional, and so on, then you could have the best model of all. Okay. Let's now do the Chassidus question, and then the essays, and we'll conclude. The Chassidus question of this week is, Hi Rabbi Jacobson, thank you so much for your wonderful weekly videocasts. In today's parlance, I would say that the work you do is huge, and you are helping to continue to keep Chassidus great. My questions are regarding Keilim. What are the Keilim of the Spheres, and why are they called Keilim? What would a good English translation be? I know that normally they use the word vessels, but since when have you seen a vessel to contain light? I've thought of them as colored light bulbs with electricity flowing to the filament being the air, but I don't know if that analogy is correct. And I have never thought of using the word Keilim for light bulbs out of this context. Are we meant to try to visualize the spheres at all? And if yes, what do you think of when you use the word Keilim? Okay. It's correct, English words are usually inadequate to interpret any Hebrew word for that matter, especially the more subtle and ethereal words like Eris and Keilim. How would you translate Eris for that matter? Lights? What does that mean? Like light bulbs? Like stars? Like the sun? Energies? So we know Chayes, Keyech, and so on. So I'll give some translations, and I think we need more than one word, especially in different contexts. Overall, Eris and Keilim, and I refer you to my book, Toward a Meaningful Life, the first chapter, Body and Soul, though I don't speak specifically Eris and Keilim, but I talk about the idea of Neshama and Guf. We have to always find what we find in our life. Where do we find Eir and Keli in our own personal lives? Your soul and your body. So you can actually translate Keilim as Gufim. And it's actually the way in Tikkun Ezer that we say in Pasuk Eliyah, Gufim, Kama Gufim. Ishtaru, Ke Gufa B'lei Nishmasa, when the Eiris are nostalgic. So body is a very good interpretation for Keilim, the bodies of the souls that they contain. Now obviously we don't speak about bodies in Atzilus. What does a body mean? But let me explain the word body in a more broader sense. And also Eiris and Keilim in a broader sense. Everything in life, starting with our own body and soul, has a body and a soul. The body is the container where the energy manifests. So the body would be the human body, the soul would be the Eir that manifests in the body. In Eir itself, there's Eir HaChochma, Eir HaBina, the energy that enters your eye, the power of vision, in the container called the eye. The power of hearing in the container called the ear. To broaden it, it could also refer to, take a book. The letters, the words on the page is the container. The message, the idea that they're conveying is the eir. In music, the musical notes are the container. The music that it plays is the eir. As you go to higher levels, if you take this analogy, basically then Keli is essentially the thing that manifests something, that defines it, that gives it shape and form. And the eir is the energy, is like we'd say form and function. That's one way to go about it. When you go to higher levels like Atzilus, obviously Keilim don't have any physical function. There's nothing physical. Both the energies and the containers are all divine. But there you can speak in Ashis of Mashpia and Makabel, for example. The Eir HaChochmeh is the divine energy that expresses expresses wisdom. The Keli is what gives it form and shape. Sometimes Muhus and Metzias is used. Muhus is Mahu. What is it? And Metzias would be what is it? And Metzias would be what shape and form it takes. So you could speak energy as being what is the Muhus, what is the personality of the thing. And the container is what form and shape it takes. Now obviously as you go higher and higher, the containers become more and more subtle. But wherever you go, the container is the expression of, or the manifestation of the energy. Now, I once heard in the name of the Rebbe's brother, Rabbi Yisrael Aryeh Leib, that he's defined Keli as Zulas. Eir would be the energy as it's by you, and Zulas, as soon as you relate to another, that's the Keli compared to the Eir. An interesting interpretation as well. As you see, it's not one linear interpretation. It depends on the circumstances. But Keli is essentially, if you go all the way to the Sheidish Hadvarim, remember there's no Eiris and Kelim in Atzmus. But there's the Koyach HaGilui and there's the Koyach HaHelam. There's the Koyach of expression, revelation, and there's the Koyach of containment. So you have both forces, because to create a universe like ours, remember, Hashem Echad, Eiris and Kelim, beyond all Eiris and Kelim, and doesn't need them. But to create a structured world, you need to have always a container and the energy within it. And they have to be tailored to each other. And then you expand the containers to receive more energy. And with that, we climb the ladder and become connected more to the divine. But it has to begin, just like a child has a small keli, the student has to receive spoon-fed, Aleph, Beis, Gimel, etc. As the mind expands, the Keilim expands, you can feed more intelligence. Until the point where the containers are so vast and expansive, they can receive all the air. Chassidus talks about that the Keilim, the Pnimius HaKeilim unites with energy, or is it seamless, or is it not? This Keilim as a function of a Keilim, let's say a cup. The function is to drink from it, or is to hold something. The inner part of the Keilim is, the function is to drink from it. The inner part, the Pnimius HaKeilim, would be to contain whatever liquid you put into it. So that is the general gist of it. Let's move to the essays. 3 essays, as always. The first one is Clearing the Closet with the Powers of the Soul, Yehudit Eichenblatt, age 51, homemaker, Los Angeles, California. Very fascinating, entertaining essay. I like reading it, about clearing the closet with the powers of the soul, using housekeeping as an analogy for a lot of Chassidic topics, going through the whole ideas of Chassidus, the methodology of Chassidus, the sources of Chassidus, application, and going through actually all the 10 spheres and how each one of them can be understood through the art of clearing your closet. Really well done. I go to meaningfullife.com/MyLife /essays-2016 for this and other essays, or subscribe to our weekly newsletter at meaningfullife.com and you will receive them in your inbox. It's a beautiful essay, really, going through all the spheres and how they apply to both your own personal life, building a beautiful home, clean and organized, and how to enjoy it, and all the other aspects, all through the lens of the spheres in this context. Finding Purpose in the Mundane is the next essay, written by Dina Goldenberg, 38 years old, teacher, Cheder Menachem, New Jersey, Lawrenceville, New Jersey. Imagine you're taking a stroll on a magnificent nature trail with majestic oak trees that seem to reach right up to the sky. You can see flashes of red, blue, yellow, and gray as birds of all shapes dance among the tree limbs, serenading you with their song. Continues in this beautiful poetic way. And suddenly the way you viewed your life seems to be altered when you see all this vastness of the infinite. It goes on to explain this, like Nadav and Avihu, when they had that surge and the passion when they ran into the Beis Hamikdash, the Mishkan, when it was first built. So the discussion is about Ratzei and Shuv, when we are able to reach to see greater heights and how it affects our lives, but the necessity to ground it and bring it back down. So ideas here are maybe known, but they're very originally presented and made very relevant. So that's essay number 2. The third essay, in Hebrew, Ma ichpas li, what bothers me? Uprooting Apathy. It's about adishut, about apathy. And this one is written by Shalom Yehuda Leib Ginsburg, 20 years old, the Menayel of Beis Chabad Carmel Tzarfati in Haifa, Israel. And this essay talks about adishut, talks about apathy, and what we can do about it, using the Maimer Va'ata Tetzava, the last Maimer the Rebbe gave out from Tafshim Mem Aleph, the Maimer about the apathy that human beings have in life, and how we can shake people up, shake ourselves up. Again, a very well done essay, short essay. And with that, we conclude the essays. We conclude this episode 136 of MyLife, Chassidus Applied. And everyone should have a very blessed Lech Lecha week, a Simcha Dika week. Simcha is Avram Avinu's birth. Avram Avinu, who began the journey, Avram corresponds, of course, to the Alter Rebbe in our Chassidic generation. And the 7th generation of Avram Moshe, 7th generation of the Rebbe, that will bring the Gula Amitis V'Hashlema V'Shachanti B'Seicham. Everyone have a blessed week, and until next Sunday, this is MyLife Chassidus Applied. Thank you very much.